For months, we've been hearing stories of a Ukrainian counteroffensive that would take place in the spring. Well, spring is over, summer's here, and we still have not seen this counteroffensive. This is because Ukraine is clearly exhausted. They are not on their first, not their second, but their third army. That means both their first and second armies have been completely wiped out, aka hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers are dead.
Ukraine is now scraping the bottom of the barrel, running out of manpower. They're actually dragging back about 30 to 35,000 Ukrainians training in Germany, Canada, the United States, the Czech Republic, other places, back to Ukraine to become the foundation for this so-called counteroffensive.
And just as importantly, Ukraine is running out of the heavy weaponry needed to fight off a modern Russian army. Air defenses, tanks, rockets, artillery systems, munitions, it's all drying up. The Russians have been striking them one by one. No amount of Ukrainian bravery or manpower can turn the tide against the powerful forces of modern warfare. Their army is clearly outgunned. They cannot defeat or destroy the Russian army, especially now. The Russians have dug in and prepared strong defensive fortifications in the southern territory that they've already captured. The Russians have basically parked the bus and are welcoming the Ukrainians to try and dislodge them.
It's a trap!
It's exactly what Russia wants. Come to us so we can destroy you. So why are the Ukrainians giving Russia what it wants? Why are they insisting on a suicidal counteroffensive? What are the Ukrainians trying to achieve? The answer to that question is simple. The Ukrainians are looking for a political victory.
This looming and very important Ukrainian counteroffensive, the implications of this are going to be very substantial because of the overall importance of keeping Western support.
They need to prove to their Western backers like the US, the UK, France, Germany, NATO, etc., that they can keep fighting. And they want to give the Russian opposition the political firepower they need to undermine and overthrow Putin in next year's election. The second part sounds a little crazy. How would that even be possible? I think we can better understand this tactic by examining the Civil War of the United States. We all know the story, right? Southern states seceded from the Union, formed the Confederacy, and established an army. The North went to war to force the South back into the Union. From the very beginning, however, it was clear who was more powerful. The North had more people, more factories, more infrastructure. But for the first 2 years of the war, that advantage wasn't so clear. The South, under the strong leadership of General Robert E. Lee, kept delivering blow after blow to the Northern armies. The North got their butt kicked time after time, humiliating President Lincoln and all his generals. It seemed like the war was a lost cause, and as casualties mounted, many in the North began to question the point of the war. Opposition to both the war and President Lincoln was growing. The political situation was just as bad as the military one. And with elections approaching, the Democrats began campaigning against President Lincoln, promising to end the war and make peace with the South. So Robert E. Lee and the Confederates saw this as an opportunity they could exploit, because despite all of their success, it was clear to Robert E. Lee that the South could not defeat the North in a prolonged war. They were up now, but not for long. They were running out of men, supplies, and time. If they were going to win, they would have to do something bold. So Lee decided to counterattack and invade the North. It seemed ridiculous. Why on earth would you abandon the defensive strategy that has been working for you and go on the offensive? Well, it had become clear what the next election was about. It wasn't just a vote for president. It was a referendum on the war itself. If Lincoln were to win re-election, the North would prolong the fight, recruit more men, kick their factories into gear, and wipe out the South. Lee needed to deliver Lincoln a humiliating defeat on his soil in order to crush Northern morale and arm the Democrats with the political firepower and messaging needed to defeat him in an election. So in September of 1862, Lee and the Confederates invaded Pennsylvania. 8 months later, both armies met at the small town of Gettysburg. After chasing the Northern army for months, Lee decided to turn this battle into a decisive one. He was running out of time. It was now or never. So after a few days of fighting, Lee ordered General Pickett to charge the center of the battlefield. It was a suicidal charge that went against all the advice of his generals, but Lee insisted that it take place. So General Pickett and his men charged through an open field with no cover for 3/4 of a mile. They incurred severe losses before they had even reached the Union Center. Volleys of bullets, field cannons, bombards, artillery shells, they were blown to bits. Their surviving soldiers that made it to the line charged and pushed through, but were quickly countered and crushed. In less than 1 hour, 5,300 men had died. Pickett's entire division wiped out.
General Pickett, sir.
You must look to your division.
General Lee, I have no division.
Humiliated, Lee was forced to retreat from Gettysburg and escape the North for good. Many historians have described this action as a foolish display of overconfidence by Lee. But if you remember the political victory Lee was going for, it becomes clear why he was desperate for the charge. Experts who examine the battle formation suggest that Lee deliberately left the Union back open in order to encourage a retreat. The idea was that Lee was willing to sacrifice thousands of men in a suicidal charge in order to force the Union to retreat. It wouldn't have destroyed the army, but it would have given the Democrats the political messaging they would need to defeat Lincoln. Imagine the headlines. A Northern retreat on Northern soil. Lee defeats the Union again. But the Northern Army was well aware of Lee's objective. They refused to give Lee what he wanted. As a result, Lee failed, and from then on, it was a slow and painful end to the war that took more than 2 years to complete. The situation is a bit similar for Ukraine. They are a smaller country with a smaller army and industrial base. The only way they've been able to compete is with Western support, but that support is not going to last forever. Their best hope is to counterattack, achieve a political victory on the battlefield, even if it's minor and temporary, to give the West the political messaging it needs to justify continued support, and also to give Russian opposition to Putin the messaging they need in the upcoming elections to defeat him. This is why Ukraine has been insisting on a counter-offensive. Even though the Russians are well fortified, well supplied, and have received hundreds of thousands of reinforcements, fresh troops, attacking their defensive position is like Pickett's absolutely suicidal charge. But it's all part of a strategy. And unfortunately for Ukraine, it's the only strategy they really have going for them.
Trust nothing. No lies.